welcome to another episode of Connecticut Better Business Bureau's Smart Consumer. We give you tips, we give you warnings about things that happen both with consumers, businesses, and the marketplace as well. So in this episode, we're going to take to the skies, something like that. Our guest today is Kevin Dillon, who's the Executive Director of the Connecticut Airport Authority. Some exciting things are going on at Bradley Airport and under the purview of the authority, and let's welcome him to the show. Welcome.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Let's talk for a moment, if we can, just about Bradley Airport. You folks are changing and you're promoting yourselves, and there are new routes that you're taking. When did this all start?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of exciting plans for Bradley Airport, but it really goes back to the governor and the state legislature deciding that there needed to be a dedicated airport authority. They wanted to bring a dedicated focus to airports here in the state. I think at that time folks felt that the true potential of Bradley Airport and some of the other airports in the state was not being maximized. So back in 2011, the airport authority was formed, the Connecticut Airport Authority. I was actually hired as the executive director in 2012. That first year that I was here in Connecticut, we spent transitioning the airports from the Department of Transportation over to the new airport authority, because it was the DOT that was actually operating Bradley and 5 general aviation airports here in the state. And it took about a year to get approval of the FAA to do that transition to allow the new airport authority to be the airport sponsor. Because as you can imagine, the federal government makes significant investments in airports, and they want to make sure that whoever's going to be the steward of the airport has the capability to do that. So since 2012, we've essentially been in charge of not only Bradley Airport, but 5 general aviation airports in the state. They include Groton New London, Hartford Brainerd, Wyndham, Danielson, and Waterbury Oxford Airport. So we manage those airports in addition to Bradley. But our goals since taking over the airport authority was really to maximize the route structure at the airport, because as you can imagine, all good things at an airport really flow from a healthy route structure that generates passengers, passengers generate revenue, and the revenue allows us to do all the things we want to do at Bradley Airport. But we're also very focused on customer service improvements, as well as the role that we play in terms of economic development here in Connecticut.
And a nice airport, a functional airport, one that gives consumers what they want, is something that people remember. I know from stopovers, for example. That in itself might not be a starting or an important thing to someone who's passing through, but when you have a nice airport, again, that's fully equipped, up to date, like Bradley, and you continue to do that, that does become a selling point, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, we're here to meet the transportation needs of the region that we serve. I mean, transportation, as you know, is vitally important to all economic development here in the state, so you need to do that well. But it's interesting, as I reflect on my career in aviation, I started back in 1975 at the ripe old age of 19, so I've been doing this for about 42 years. Back then, the operation of airports was simply viewed as a governmental function. And in a lot of respects, an airport, looked at it's great if people come to the airport, and it's okay if they don't as well. Today, airports are extremely competitive. It's a competitive business. We're competing with the New York airports. We're competing with Logan. We're competing with TF Green, Westchester Airport, Albany. So an airport today, to be successful, you really have to differentiate yourself. And the best way to do that is on the customer service front.
Now, when you explain that we're in competition with these airports in other states, what does that mean at the practical level? That unless you keep up with the times and can compete with them, that passengers might want to go to one of those airports another way and fly out of there?
Yeah, a lot of it is really based around passenger volume, right? We need to attract passengers to our airports to convince the airlines to put different routes in. Right? If you want a nonstop to Albuquerque, well, we have to demonstrate that people are willing to use Bradley Airport to go to Albuquerque versus continuing to travel down to New York. So the best way to do that is to convince the consumer that if you come to Bradley, you're going to have a great experience. And then we build on those routes that we're looking to bring in, and that brings additional passengers, which feeds additional route structure at the airport as well.
No, the airports themselves technologically have improved immensely, but if we talk about the consumer level, we see people plugging in their smart devices. We see a very friendly environment for putting a computer up or a laptop. We didn't see that a decade ago or a decade and a half ago.
No doubt about it. And in fact, the airline performance has gotten much better as a result of technology. You know, when I first started in this business, in the middle of a snowstorm, you really had no way of contacting passengers to tell them, hey, your flight's going to be delayed or your flight's going to be canceled. And that's where you would hear, 10, 15 years ago, the horror stories about terminals being filled with passengers sleeping overnight because their flights were canceled. Now today, the airlines can reach out to passengers real time to update them as to what the actual flight status is and whether or not the flight is going to operate. And consumers are changing how they react to the airlines. You know, for example, a good portion of the overall population now is checking in online versus going to ticket counters. Really, unless you have to check a bag, there's no reason to go to a ticket counter any longer. You check in on your smartphone and you go directly to security.
And this is something that had to be done in concert with federal authorities as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. The federal government's been a big partner of the aviation system here across the country. Certainly here at Bradley, they're a good partner of ours. A lot of the work that we do at the airport, some of the physical improvements, the capital improvements, are all funded by federal grants at the airport. So they become a big part of what we're doing.
So Bradley has torn down Terminal 2. What's going to be happening with that?
Well, right now, we have a major project to build a new transportation center at the airport that's going to be built immediately in front of where Terminal B was prior to it being taken down. And that transportation center is principally there to serve the rental car business. It's going to be a great customer service improvement. Today, rental cars are scattered in and around the airport. You have to take a bus to get to your rental car. Once this new facility is built, it'll be connected to the existing terminal, as well as we're going to leave an allowance to connect it to a future terminal, so that you'll no longer have to take a bus at Bradley to get to a rental car. You'll walk right from the terminal via a walkway into this new transportation center, get your car and go. It's also going to have some public parking in there, and then it's also going to have what we call a transit center. What we're looking to do at the airport is really enhance the ground transportation options to get to the airport, principally bus and rail service. You know, we want regional bus service to come out of places such as Vermont. We have a good passenger base up in Vermont, certainly throughout Massachusetts. We want to build this transit center to process those bus passengers right at that location. Then we're also very interested in connecting to the rail service, and I think your viewers are probably aware there's a big push to enhance the rail coming up from New Haven into Hartford and then ultimately into Springfield. Well, there will be a number of those trains that stop at the Windsor Locks train station, which is about 3 miles from the airport as the crow flies. And what we want to do is run up front a high-frequency bus back and forth between that rail station and our new transit center right on the airport. Ultimately, though, we're expecting to actually have a light rail connection from that rail station directly into this transit center. And I envision a day where, for example, a rail passenger that gets on the train in New Haven to fly out of Bradley could check their bag down in New Haven and they don't see it again until they get to their destination.
So it's kind of, except for that last part, is very much like the European model where you can take a train,
Yes.
go right into the station or the airport and get off.
There's no doubt. I mean, rail to airport connectivity is very important to us as we look to develop international service, because as you know, Europeans are very familiar with rail to airport connectivity. In fact, as we compete with TF Green, which already has a rail connection right at the airport, that starts to loom large in terms of us pursuing airlines at the same time that TF Green's is pursuing the same airline. That's where you get into that competitive piece that I spoke about earlier.
Well, I think the fact that you say you've got people who are coming in from Massachusetts and coming in from Vermont to go to Bradley Airport says a lot about that there is loyalty and that competition does matter.
Absolutely. It's certainly a regional facility. If you look at Massachusetts alone, it represents about 20% of our total passenger volume is coming out of Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts. So it's a big piece of what we do. We certainly want to keep the folks up in Springfield and Western Massachusetts happy as well.
What does your research tell you about the most important things to flyers? If you can give me a 1 through 5, whatever order you want.
Sure, I think, first and foremost is you have to have the route structure to serve their needs. Then once you start talking about the level of connectivity out of Bradley, people are very focused on nonstop service. That's what people want. In a lot of respects, people aren't interested flying to Chicago and then connecting to the West Coast. They want that direct West Coast connectivity. And that's why when the Airport Authority was formed, we had two major goals that we fortunately have already met. Number one was to reestablish transatlantic service back at Bradley, and the second was to reestablish transcontinental service. And I'm pleased to say, on the transatlantic service, we now have Aer Lingus service to Dublin. We also have Norwegian service to Edinburgh. Those two locations allow people to connect anywhere in Europe on a one-stop basis through Dublin and through Edinburgh. On a transcontinental service, we were very pleased to restore service to LAX. Very, very important market for us, not only because of the connectivity back and forth between this region and LA, but flying into LA opens up all of the Asian locations as well because of the ease of connection through LA. And since we established that service, we were also pleased to be able to add San Francisco service as well. So right now, in terms of our route development, we continue to be focused on trying to enhance West Coast service. A city that we're very anxious to add to our menu of service is Seattle. There's obvious aerospace connectivity between Seattle and this area, so very, very important for us to be able to provide that service. But we're also focused on a lot of other markets in the U.S., Austin, Texas, Milwaukee, Jacksonville, Nashville, all very, very important markets for us to be able to obtain nonstop service. A lot of folks ask me, well, how do you decide which city it is that you actually pursue? And we do an awful lot of research, but principally what we're looking for is those cities that have big business connectivity to this area. And that's why we go out and we maintain a very healthy relationship with the area businesses to find out what are their destination needs, what are their travel budgets. And when we collect that information, that becomes very powerful in terms of making a case to an airline to actually start that service. I mean, if you look at the Aer Lingus service, for example, when we were looking to reestablish transatlantic service, we ended up working with 23 companies that we feel are emblematic of the industries you'd find in our market area. And what we found is that those 23 companies alone were spending in excess of $40 million on transatlantic travel. That's a very powerful thing to be able to put in front of an airline to convince them to start service.
So is what's good for the airline and for the airport good for consumers, and how so?
I think it is. Again, the airlines want to serve those routes that have the business on it, and those are the routes that our consumers are looking for. So it goes hand in hand. As I said, we're principally trying to address first and foremost the needs of our business travelers. Here at Bradley, we're a little bit unusual that our mix of travel is about 50% business travel versus 50% leisure. If you look at other regional airports, airports such as T.F. Green over in Providence or Manchester up in New Hampshire, you would find a 65% split, 35% being business, 65% leisure. So we feel very fortunate that we have a very big business market here. And you'd hear from any airline that the mainstay of any route, unless it's a specific leisure destination, is that business travel. They want to see the business traveler on those flights because they know they'll be able to maintain a certain fare level. So unless it's Florida service or Caribbean service, it's really the business traveler that's dictating what routes are coming into Bradley.
So we can extrapolate, if a business has those newer companies and routes to deal with, that means it's more appealing to a passenger who wants to fly to a specific destination without having to go to New York.
Absolutely. I mean, we feel it's very, very important for the regional economy to have this level of service, not only to keep existing businesses here that they don't have to relocate for their air transportation needs, but to hopefully draw additional businesses to Connecticut as well, to see that there's a thriving medium hub airport at Bradley Airport. It becomes a very, very big selling point in terms of business relocation to the area.
How about vendors? When consumers or customers or flyers walk through an airport, there are places they want to go automatically. A magazine stand, maybe pick up a few bites here and there, electronics. How do you find vendors? Do vendors bid to try and get the space? Is that a big deal with the flying public?
Absolutely. I think, right after, making sure that you have the appropriate nonstop routes, that's what consumers look at, is the convenience of the facility. Can I get on and off the airport quickly? Is parking convenient? Once I get to the airport, do we have the level of services that a business traveler or a leisure traveler are looking for? In some respects, that's why we just recently built a new first-class lounge at the airport that's available for any passenger. You don't have to be flying on a first-class ticket to utilize it, but we felt that that was a very important amenity to be able to provide, particularly to our international travelers, to ensure that that lounge was in place. But we're constantly looking, to bring new services to the airport. Again, all with an eye towards differentiating our customer service experience from other airports. We will frequently put out what are called requests for proposal to, for example, the concession business to bring in new restaurants or new retail stores to the airport. So we do that on a fairly regular basis. But one of the things that we want to do as we continue to build out Bradley is build more space for concession opportunities. It is one of the things that I do feel the existing terminal that we have at Bradley lacks, is sufficient concession space. And that will become more critical as we continue to add more passengers to the airport. Last year we handled just over 6 million passengers. I do believe that Bradley Airport could become a 10 million passenger airport. But when you start talking numbers of that magnitude, you really need to bring a lot more services into the airport to adequately serve those passengers. And while we have a lot of gate capacity in the existing terminal building, we may have to start looking at additional terminal infrastructure just to supply that concession space opportunity at the airport.
When you're talking about convenience for consumers and things that are on their wish list, some of the services or some of the advantages available through the government, such as TSA PreCheck and any ability to get through those lines faster, that in turn helps the airports too, doesn't it?
No doubt about it. And PreCheck was a great addition by the TSA. I'm very pleased to say that we have a PreCheck enrollment office right at Bradley Airport. Because that has all added to the passenger experience, not only for the passengers that are utilizing PreCheck, who can go quickly through and don't have to take their shoes off or take their computer out of the bag, but it also enhances the experience of the other passengers that are using the traditional security lanes by offloading some of that activity level. And that is something, for example, the security wait times that we monitor very, very closely at the airport. We think that's a big selling point. It ties back to that convenience factor that people are looking for, and that's why they go to a regional airport versus a New York or a Boston. And I'm pleased to say at Bradley, our wait time in security, even at our peak times, never really exceeds 20 minutes. I mean, you'll have an unusual condition from time to time during school vacation weeks or heavy travel periods, but it's rare. It's rare to see a wait time exceeding 20 minutes. And in the non-peak periods at the airport, most times you can walk right up to the security screening equipment.
If we look back a couple of years ago, you have to look very far, before the profit margins changed so radically for the airlines, passengers were ornery. They were angry about all sorts of things. Has that changed? Has it changed to a great degree, somewhat?
Well, I think the airlines have gotten a lot better, I think, at staying in touch with their passengers. I think, in my experience, the things that used to really annoy passengers in the past was, not being kept informed about delays, not being kept informed about cancellations. And again, as I said earlier, I think the airlines have gotten very, very good at that. They make good use of social media. They have the ability to contact passengers directly now, where in the past they didn't. I do believe, though, that the airlines, to a certain extent, have an image problem that they struggle with today. in their zeal to enhance profits, they've shrunk down seat size and different airline or aircraft service levels. And I think some folks, particularly those that have flown the airlines for a number of decades now, know that some of those service changes have not worked to the benefit of the passenger. But I'd have to say overall, I think the overall performance level of the airlines these days is much better than it had been, certainly when I started in this business.
You must go to other airports and compare what they've got in terms, and let's talk about stores and concessions. Mm-hmm. Are those the kinds of things you'd look at and say, gee, we'd like to have one of those at the airport? Absolutely.
I think, aesthetics are very important in airports. It makes people feel comfortable before they get on their flight, so we're constantly looking at those types of things. We do compare ourselves to other airports. We do regular surveys of our passengers, and we try to vet the information that we're getting from our passengers versus rankings of other airports. In fact, we participate in the J.D. Power rankings. Unfortunately, this year they're changing the profile of how they do those rankings, so we're moving into a different class of airport, which unfortunately skews prior year rankings, so that you can't really show the improvement that we think we're experiencing at the airport. But our own passenger surveys show continuing improvement at the airport, and that's a great way for us to be able to reach out directly to the consumer and interact with them. Most people are willing to spend a couple of minutes with our surveyors who roam the gate areas at the airport from time to time to ask different questions about their overall airport experience, and that's whether it was security wait times, how easy did you find parking, what do you think about the cost of parking, how was your check-in process at the airline, what do you think about the amenities in the gate areas. And that's very valuable information for us to now collect and react to. And as a result of that, we've made some significant changes at the airport. For example, some of the feedback we got is that folks were looking for a local brand. Okay, we were able to bring in Two Roads Brewery as a result of that. People reported that they wanted to see better variety in terms of our restaurant food. That's why we brought in Phillips Seafood. So it's a real opportunity for us to try to interact directly with our passengers and give them the service levels that they're looking for.
Kevin, we have less than a minute to go. Are there 2 or 3 sentences you can give to consumers, something they should know before they head to the airport and before they head to Bradley, and what to look forward to?
Well, I think it's just a convenience factor at Bradley. We are extremely big on that. We're trying to keep people in our catchment area at home. We don't want you traveling up to Boston. We don't want you traveling down to New York. We think your travel experience down to those locations or up to Boston is not going to be good. We're out there constantly trying to add the new services, and I think if you haven't used Bradley in a while, give us a try. I think you're going to see it's a very, very convenient experience.
Very good. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Great to be with you.
And that does it for this episode of Better Business Bureau's Smart Consumer. Many thanks to our guest, Kevin Dillon, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Airport Authority, for joining us today. The most important thing you can do is share what you've learned today with family members, colleagues, friends. And we know that by educating each other, we can find out how to protect ourselves and how to find out about some of the best deals possible for consumers. Connecticut Better Business Bureau would like to thank Nutmeg Television for providing us with the facilities and the wonderful staff to produce this show. Until the next episode, I'm Howard Schwartz. Thank you for joining us. Take care.